will you? Thank you. And we're also getting an AI transcript. So just so you know that that's happening. Welcome everyone on this cool, deep fall evening. We're so glad to have you with us. My name is Sue Bookchin. I'm Executive Director of Be the Peace Institute, which is a nonprofit organization in Nova Scotia dedicated to ending gender-based violence as a significant step toward gender intersectional equity and justice. And we do this through projects that address both the roots and consequences of gender-based violence. All of our work is done in partnership. And so we are one partner with several organizations who have planned and are hosting these events about violence and harassment in politics. And those organizations are Second Story Women's Center, the South Shore Sexual Health Center, Harbor House Transition House, the Transition House Association of Nova Scotia, Transgender Non-Binary Rights Advocacy Nova Scotia, Immigrant Migrant Women's Association of Halifax, YWCA Halifax, and two authors who are joining us this evening and professors at Toronto Metropolitan University. So we are thrilled for all of those partnerships, as we always are. Be the Peace Institute comes to you from Mi'kma'ki, the traditional territory of the Mi'kmaq First Peoples of this land. And many of you are coming from other First Nations lands in what is now referred to as Canada. We honor both the ancestors and the current stewards of the land and water, done with care for all creatures and beings that nourish all of us. We know that the land was never ceded or surrendered, but stolen by successive colonial governments in spite of treaties of peace and friendship signed almost 300 years ago. We are committed to ongoing learning and action toward reconciliation and reparation of so many harms to Indigenous people and through so many generations. So I'll tell you just a little bit about how these conversations started. We have a municipal councilor who was trying to decide whether to reoffer for municipal council. For those of you who are not in Nova Scotia, we just had municipal elections and we're having a provincial election next week on Tuesday, which is why many of our elected officials in provincial government in Nova Scotia couldn't be here this evening. But the question about whether to run for office or to reoffer in an election, for women, gender diverse people of all kinds, considering the impact of hateful social media messages, trolls, threats, and also the rise of some extremist elements among us, and how these things would impact them and their safety, and also impact their families, and whether they could feel safe on the campaign trail, is a constant thought process. And so while we were talking about that, all the broader issues of women, gender diverse, and people of color, Indigenous people, who are both candidates and also as elected officials, we know experience misogyny, racism, personal attacks on appearance, things that are designed to intimidate, diminish respect and stature. And these are things that men, particularly white men, never have to deal with. Not never, but mostly don't deal with. It doesn't come at them in the same way. And these kinds of things come not only from the public, but it is particularly a betrayal when it comes from one's own colleagues in elected office, or happens in our legislatures or in parliament. And that mirrors workplaces and general society. Unfortunately, it is not a bastion of example of equity and justice. And there are very few structures for support and resolution of the kinds of things that happen. And so many people decide to leave politics because they just see no way to resolve it. The vitriol and the threats dissuade many people from running at all. And that compromises our democracy because we need diversity in all positions of leadership and governance and decision making in order for us to make the best decisions for everyone. And for many of you, you are the converted, I assume, and so you know all of this. But the first essential step, and one of our panelists is from Equal Voice Canada, the first essential step is getting more women and gender diverse and racially and culturally diverse people into those arenas. So that then we can start the hard work of dismantling the patterns of patriarchy and the supremacy of whiteness that many people are still dealing with. So in the midst of these conversations and talking about what we could do beyond supporting some of our candidates in our communities by going with them door to door, and how can we tackle these unacceptable dynamics, one of our colleagues heard about a new book that was just published called Gender-Based Violence in Canadian Politics in the Me Too Era. And we thought, wow, how fortuitous is that? We must connect with that person because maybe they're doing a book tour and could come to Nova Scotia. So Tracey Raney is one of those people, and she was excited to partner with us on these panels as kind of a virtual kind of book tour, although we're not only going to talk about the book, but reading the excerpts in the book that are available online, I learned so much about the history of enfranchisement advocacy in the world that has made incredible gains in the global South that maybe we can take some lessons from, and we need to catch up with that. Unfortunately, this evening, one of the panelists, Cheryl Collier, is not able to be here. She had an injury and can't join us. And we came very close to having the Deputy Premier of Manitoba join us, Uzoma Asagwara, but they were called to a cabinet meeting. So maybe next time. So a few housekeeping things, and then we'll get moving. Please remain muted while the panelists are speaking. And we would ask you to put questions in the chat. Two people are monitoring the chat, and so we'll see your questions. As I said earlier, for those who've just arrived, we are recording this so that we have a link to send out with some resources that have been compiled. And we will facilitate and manage the event to ensure a respectful environment and discourse. And to keep us on track and on time, we'll go until 8 o'clock. And we ask your cooperation about that. And please forgive us in advance if something goes unexpectedly awry, because life is unpredictable. Technology is unpredictable. We humans are incredibly unpredictable. We'll do our best. And one last thing I'll mention to you is that there are 3 books that are going to be available directly from the publisher for the participants and registrants of these panels, with a promo code for a 25% discount for a limited time through about mid-December. So we'll put that information in the chat. And that is Tracey and Cheryl's book, Gender-Based Violence in Canadian Politics in the Me Too Era. It is also a book written by Peggy Nash, our moderator, called Women Winning Office. And also it's the same publisher for a book that another colleague of ours, Pamela Cross, just published called And Sometimes They Kill You. Kind of a macabre title for a book that is everything you ever wanted to know about gender-based violence is in that book. Pam is incredibly skilled. So I'll turn it over right now to my colleague Tracey Gazzo to do introductions.
Thanks, Sue. So yes, my name is Tracey Godso, she, her, and I'm the project and resource coordinator at Be the Peace Institute. And it's my great pleasure to introduce you to our very talented panelists and our moderator, who I'll start with. Peggy Nash lives and works in Toronto in the Dish with One Spoon territory, home of the Anishinaabe, Mississauga, and Haudenosaunee nations. She is a co-instructor of the Women in the House program and the Institute for Democratic Leadership at Toronto Metropolitan University. She's a former NDP Member of Parliament, serving as official opposition critic in finance and industry. Peggy is also the author of the book, Women Winning Office, An Activist's Guide to Getting Elected. Prior to politics, she was a senior labor negotiator with the CAW, now Unifor, where she developed groundbreaking human rights and equity programs, for which she was named to the Order of Canada and awarded an honorary doctorate of laws from Brock University. Tracey Raney is an award-winning full professor at Toronto Metropolitan University. She has published widely on topics related to Canadian politics, women in politics, and gender-based violence in politics. In 2024, she co-edited a book on gender-based violence in Canadian politics in the Me Too era, which Sue referenced. Dr. Raney co-teaches in the Women in the House program with Peggy at TMU. The Women in the House program is an interdisciplinary experiential learning course available to students who identify as women or gender non-binary across the university. Courtney Clarke is from Newfoundland and Labrador and focuses her community work in the areas of violence prevention, gender parity, and economic well-being. Courtney is the director of programs with Equal Voice after spending almost 4 years as co-chair of Equal Voice's Newfoundland and Labrador chapter. She has been facilitating campaign schools since 2021. Courtney is the previous chair of Violence Prevention Avalon East and established the Jane Doe Graduate Award in Anti-Violence Research at Memorial University to support local researchers. Courtney has been appointed to the Provincial Advisory Council on the Status of Women for the Government of Newfoundland and Labrador since January 2023. Courtney is elected to her second term as the director of Newfoundland and Labrador's Credit Union, representing the financial interests of more than 20,000 members. For her community work, she was profiled as one of the top 100 most powerful women in Canada by the Women's Executive Network in 2022 and was the recipient of the Newfoundland and Labrador Human Rights Award in 2023. And just to note that Equal Voice has a report out currently on gender sensitive parliaments with 10 recommendations, which we'll share in the chat as well. And finally, last but not least, Leah Gazan is the NDP Member of Parliament for Winnipeg Centre, which she has represented since 2019. She's the NDP's critic for women and gender equality, as well as the critic for children, families, and social development, and for post-secondary education. She is also a member of the Wood Mountain Lakota Nation located in Saskatchewan Treaty 4 territory. In 2023, Gazan tabled a motion to recognize the crisis of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls and Two-Spirit people as a national emergency, which was passed unanimously by members of Parliament. She later initiated and oversaw a study on the implementation of a red dress alert system to address this crisis at the House of Commons Standing Committee on the Status of Women, on which she sits as the NDP's representative. An amazing group. So a very warm welcome to all of you, and I will pass it over to Peggy, our moderator.
Thank you so much for that kind introduction of all of us, and a shout out to Be the Peace for initiating this discussion. It's wonderful that we could all come together. Thank you to all of you for taking time out of your schedules to join us through the magic of Zoom. It's great that we can have this discussion no matter where we are. And sometimes, as I'm sure you all know, sometimes these discussions can be difficult. And so just a reminder to take good care, whether we know it or not, or feel it or not. these discussions can be heavy for us. Just by way of introduction, I've always been someone who advocated diverse leadership, promoting diverse leadership, and have spent a lot of my time doing leadership education. And since I was in elected office, I wanted to demystify that work of running for election and finding out about political parties and being involved. What's a nomination meeting like? How do you do all this? And so it's been a lot of my work since I left politics over the last decade. And as was said, I wrote a book about it. And I have to say, working with Professor Raney, Tracey, when we engage with young students, what comes up is this issue of harassment, abuse, violence. And I have to say, it just drives me crazy because it's it's about discouraging more diverse representation. It's about saying we don't want your voice. So better you don't even try. And that just really gets me. So I think the more we discuss the issue of gender-based violence in all forms of leadership, as Tracey, you go into in your book, I think the better, and in my experience, the more we come together and talk about issues, the better we are to be able to develop strategies to work together for change. So thank you all for being here this evening. I just want to say as a first question to the panelists, if there's anything you would like to add in terms of locating yourself or better introduce or additionally introducing yourself, feel free. But I want to begin with the elephant in the room, which is the recent US election. And maybe MP Gazan, Leah, I'll start with you. And you know, how do you take that election? How do you see this moment? And is it an indication that we are living in a more misogynist, homophobic, classist, racist time, or is this something that that we can just blaze ahead on the path we're on? How do you see the impact of the U.S. election?
So I think it's important to note that, there's always been racism, there's always been homophobia, there's always been misogyny. I think what happened, in fact, when Trump was first elected is he kind of opened a Pandora box of the garbage factory of all of these things, making it socially acceptable to be an extremist on regarding many topics, whether it's reproductive justice, his whole attack on migrants right now, the deportation of migrants, and it's I would say it's spilling over in Canada. But I think we often forget the whole foundations of Canada are built on the wrongful dispossession of land and violence that has been perpetrated against Indigenous people. The ongoing genocide of Indigenous people around lands, territories, and resources are, in fact, the foundations of those lands. And you cannot separate the resource extractive industry and the colonization of Canada and the ongoing genocide and violence, certainly against Indigenous women and girls. The same treatment they have of Mother Earth is the same treatment Indigenous women experience, particularly around resource extraction projects, where there's higher instances of violence, rape, and sex trafficking and sexual exploitation. So, and I share that because as an Indigenous woman, my experience in the world has always coexisted with misogyny, racism, sexism, and violence, normalized gender-based violence, to the point of the Prime Minister of Canada calling what is happening with Indigenous women and ongoing genocide, and then failing to act. A normalized genocide that a prime minister can call it on genocide and not take actions to resolve it. So, you know, certainly with what happened in the States, the election, was I surprised with the results? No, I wasn't, for a couple of reasons. One, I think it's still persists in North America, as we saw with the polling. There's a hesitance to vote for women, particularly Black women, BIPOC women. And we are at a critical juncture globally. You know, certainly one of the pillars that she ran on was protecting the right to access safe, trauma-informed abortion care. And although that should be an issue that we're all concerned about, bodily autonomy and the right to choose, wasn't the issue of the day. And I think as progressive, certainly as a progressive woman in progressive politics, you know, we have to hold up the human rights of all people. And I think one of the issues, certainly in the United States, that I think resulted, in fact, in the results in Michigan, for example, is a failure to take clear positions on the Middle East. You know, if we're going to talk about gender-based violence, it extends beyond Canadian borders to Afghanistan, for example. And we live in a diversified world with diverse women, with diverse gendered folks that are dealing with the hardest impacts of this extremism, including in Alberta, where they've gotten rid of gender or gender affirming care for young people. So was I surprised with the results? No, I was not. Was I shocked that Trump got reelected? No. He has a lot of money. He has a lot of power. And I wasn't, unfortunately, I wasn't shocked, especially with the rise of extremism, misinformation, conspiracy theories, and as we've seen, even in Canada, foreign interference in elections. And I'm not saying there was foreign interference, however, that certainly sways things, seems to be swaying things politically on a global scale.
Certainly, that's a hot topic in Parliament right now.
Yes, it sure
Yeah.
is, even though we've been filibustered for 500 years, but by the conservatives, but
Good point. Good point. Courtney, I'm going to throw that to you. Are you in agreement that we just swim in a sea of racism and sexism and colonialism and homophobia? I mean, you do a lot of campaign schools. What's your take on this?
You know, I couldn't have said it better than Leah when it comes to the foundations of our own governance models being based in violence. That can't be lost on us, and the way that US political rhetoric is seeping into our own system. I agree. The result for the recent US election was not what we hoped for, but it was what we prepared for at Equal Voice, for three reasons, really. A, we all remember how we felt in 2016. B, we know a lot of people in our network across Canada would be looking to us in that moment for some support. And C, even if Kamala Harris had won, we were prepared for the potential escalation of violence and backlash similar to what we saw in January 6th. So no matter what that outcome would have been, we were anxious. But similar to what Leah said, our political systems were created by cis white men to uphold their power. The system is not broken. It is working as it was originally intended. So we really work towards dismantling that piece by piece and reimagining that. And going back to something you said, Peggy, around violence and harassment being meant to keep us out, research shows that women and people of color pass more robust legislation more often than white male counterparts. We're known for being less corrupt, for having better international relations. The World Economic Forum says that countries with greater gender representation reap better economic benefits. Dr. Supriya Garikapati did a worldwide study of politicians during the first quartile of COVID and overwhelmingly showed that of 130 countries, the ones led by women or influenced mostly by women had better socioeconomic results. The data is there that we do tend to lead better, and we are demanding that space to do so. So there is some backlash there. And you're right, we are on the ground with campaign schools with a lot of people who are just entering politics for the first time, behind the scenes, on the ballot. We also do a lot of focus on retention of women and gender diverse representation in politics. And that misogyny, racism, transphobia, ableism, anti-Islamophobia, you name it, it has always been there. But something that Leah touched on as well is, the same way in which globalization efforts have increased the ways in which things like diseases like COVID spread and mutate much quicker and easier. Globalization does the same for harassment. It's not just the trolls anymore. It's not even, the AI deep fakes, foreign interference potentially. There's search engine optimization compromising that shares propaganda more easily with our loved ones. The ability to hurt people is just so much more accessible than ever. And we also can't discount the harassment happening on the ground domestically by the public and within the system itself. Just speaking to recent events in Canada, we have seen several women politicians resign recently over extreme levels of harassment and intimidation, both online and offline, gender-based or based on other intersections of identity, whether that's the mayor of Gatineau, BC MLAs Melanie Mark, MP Pam Demoff, MLA Shannon Phillips in Alberta, more specifically Quebec. Almost 10% of Quebec's 8,000 local politicians have quit since 2021. And the province has now had to have a politician helpline and adopt laws to fine people who are intimidating and harassing politicians in response. So that's a relatively new law. I'm excited to kind of see where it goes and if that's something that can be replicated a bit. But it's not just the public, it's in the legislature. Like, as we all know, politics is a space that is heavily male dominated. It's a very unique place to work, considering many people within politics have different titles, different employment conditions. So we're not even just talking about elected officials, we're talking about political staffers, nonpartisan government staffers. Many people who work within the legislature experience contract work, precarious work, the imbalance of power dynamics and strong hierarchical cultures. And all of these features of unstable and precarious employment are interrelated with sexual harassment. No matter what province, no matter what territory, a lot of the elected officials and staffers we spoke to during our sexual harassment in legislatures project feel that they're very insecure in the harassment training that they're given. In fact, 46% of the respondents said that they have never been able to get support from a direct superior around the steps of understanding how to address sexual harassment in the workplace. And 14% of them have reported that they don't think they've ever even gotten it. So if the processes aren't in place within the legislature itself to protect, we're enabling that inner legislative behavior to continue, and we're not going to be able to keep good people on the ballot or behind the scenes in politics. But there are some legislatures that are making serious changes since our recommendations. And if folks have any other questions around key findings and recommendations around that, I'm always happy to talk more.
Thanks, Courtney. So I think I hear you say there's a myriad of factors that build on the kind of original colonialist structure, racist structure that our institutions are built on. But that are exacerbating them in a way that is reinforcing that misogynist, racist, classist behaviors. And yet more and more not usual suspects are trying to get involved in politics. So that's kind of contradictory, but encouraging in some ways. Now, Tracey, you and Cheryl Collier wrote a whole book on this, on gender-based violence in politics. And maybe you can just tell us a bit about why you wrote the book, what you've been finding, and is it true that things are getting worse? And then later on in the discussion, we'll get to what we can do about it. So Tracey, over to you.
Great. Thanks, Peggy. The origins for the book that Cheryl and I co-edited with some amazing research from a lot of different authors in the book really began with a conversation that Cheryl and I had at the 2015 Canadian Political Science Association meeting, where a few months prior to that, in 2014, it became public through the media that two women from MPs from the NDP had been sexually assaulted and sexually harassed by two men MPs from the Liberal Party. As a result of that, Prime Minister, actually he was the leader of the third party at the time, Justin Trudeau, gave a press conference where he said that he was expelling these men Liberal MPs from his caucus, and that there would be an independent but private secret investigation that the party was going to oversee to look into this. And as a result of these events, as it turned out, there was no policy put in place in the Canadian House of Commons to deal with situations of sexual harassment when one member sexually harasses another member. And so Cheryl and I were having this conversation at CPSA and saying to ourselves, as feminist political scientists, first of all, how did we not know that that was the case? And second of all, how is it possible that the political workplace that makes the rules for the rest of us related to sexual harassment specifically did not have its own set of rules in place to deal with this type of abhorrent behavior? And so that then began Cheryl and I having conversations about, writing a piece on that. And we did, and that one was published in 2018 in the Canadian Journal of Political Science. And while we were writing that, the domestic and the global context really shifted. We saw, for example, the second wave of the Me Too movement, which was originated by Tarana Burke in 2006, but went viral on social media after Alyssa Milano's tweet went out. And from that moment, what we saw is that more women political actors very bravely were willing to speak out about their experiences of everything, of racism and of transphobia and homophobia, and all of that. So to go back to what the two previous panelists have said, this is baked into settler colonial societies. It is not new, but what we are seeing is that more women political actors and others are willing to speak out about it. And so this was sort of the origins for us to think about the book. And so the book is an edited volume, and what we did is look to who was doing exciting new research in the area. And we contacted a number of experts at all different stages of career. We've got some really great PhD students. We've got more seasoned academics to write about what they know about. And so this is what the book is about, is this collection of different scholars. And I can talk a little bit about some of the specifics of that. But just to give a sense of the context, because I know this is something that Sue talked about at the outset, is that what we were seeing is that there were academics and activists outside of Canada, Mona-Lena Crook, Juliana Restrepo-Sanin, Jennifer Piscopo, Gabrielle Bardell, and many others who were doing really amazing and important research in other parts of the world on this issue of violence against women in politics and gender-based violence. And what this research was demonstrating is that in the late 1990s and early 2000s, there was a network of politicians, activists, practitioners, academics, predominantly located in Latin America, who were really working hard on this issue, drawing attention to it, gathering data, and pressing for action, demanding action from political leaders. And so the work of Juliana Restrepo-Sanin in particular points out that in 2012, Bolivia became the first country in the world to criminalize political violence and harassment against women. And that law is really interesting and important. So it states that violence and harassment are violations of women's human rights. And then it lists actions that would undermine women's presence in politics. So things like stereotyping, denial of resources, giving false information. And it aims to protect women candidates and elected officials, including women in social and political organizations. And there were other measures that were adopted across Latin America. And some of those are standalone laws that criminalize violence and harassment against women political actors, or that include violence against women in politics, either in their electoral laws or in violence against women laws specifically. And what's really important, I think, about this research and this activism is that it indicates that these measures are a direct result of women's activism in civil society and the state. So activists at the local level were using international norms and international frameworks to propose innovative solutions to the problem. And then international actors were working to foster these connections amongst activists and politicians across the region of Latin America. And so Cheryl and I were looking at this amazing research that was emerging and all of the activism occurring, particularly in Latin America, and thinking, well, what about Canada? We know this problem is happening in Canada. And so the goal of the book really is to bring Canada into conversation with these global discussions and global dialogues. And what the authors in our book argue, I think sort of the overall perspective is that simply because Canada is in the global north and that Canada is a global democracy does not mean that gender-based violence in politics is not a serious issue. And in fact, it is a part of liberal democracy. It's a feature of it. And it is a part of the fact that we are a settler colonial system. And so we mustn't look to the US with smug superiority, which we sometimes ought to do, because we have these problems in Canada, and it's important that we raise these perspectives. And I think, one other thing I'd like to kind of just highlight about the book is that we deliberately asked, and I think our authors delivered on, applying an intersectional approach to this issue. So it is about gender-based violence, but it is also about taking apart gender and thinking about the other intersecting identities and the ways in which violence and harassment impact, for example, Indigenous women's political actors' experiences. And just to flag one chapter by Rebecca Major and Cynthia Sturby. So their research is on Indigenous women's political actors. And what they argue in their chapter, what their research shows, is that it is the embeddedness of the effects of colonization that not just from the past, but also in the present and in their lived experiences, and how intergenerational trauma impacts the leadership experiences of Indigenous women. And so that's one takeaway for sure. And then the second one, and then I'll stop talking, is that we wanted to think about, and this is building on the research of other scholars, about how it's not just the personal and family costs of when political actors experience violence and harassment. It really is about the democratic costs to representation, to inclusion, to good governance. And so those pathways to power, Peggy, and the work that you've done and the work that Equal Voice has done, we want to be replenishing the pipeline, but it's really tough to do that when young folks are looking at the experiences of current MPs and what's happening to them, especially when that harassment and violence is so public, because what it's doing then is it's sending a message, not just to that one individual politician or staff or a political actor, it's sending a message to the whole public that if you decide that you want to put your hat in the ring, you can expect that this is what's going to happen to you as well. So it's important for us to be thinking about those personal costs and also the democratic costs.
Yeah, good point. I don't think we want to be Pollyanna about it when we're speaking with prospective candidates or those who want to get involved. I just want to interject one moment because MP Gazan only has the ability to be with us till 7:15 Atlantic time. So I just want to encourage anyone with questions to put the questions in the chat, and we'll pull out questions for Leah to answer before she leaves. So just want to flag that. I see there are some questions in there already. But Tracey, I just want to come back to you. It's so interesting. I mean, your book is fabulous and so interesting. The work that has been done in other countries, especially in Latin America. And I note that there have been several women national leaders in Latin America. So really, I guess I have two questions. One is, does that play a factor in this research getting done and in the motivation of academics to and activists, I guess, to look into what they could be doing differently? And also, I mean, I look at with all of the, the sea of sexism and racism that we swim in. I look at Mexico and the election of Claudia Sheinbaum, a Jewish woman elected in that what I think historically has been seen as a very kind of macho society. And I wonder what your take is on that, given your research. Tracey, to you.
Yeah. So I am not a Latin American expert. And really the focus of the book was for us to think about why it is that Canada has not been having a conversation about gender-based violence and the lack of research in the Canadian context. And I don't, I certainly agree with you about us not taking a Pollyanna-ish approach. And we know that in the research that has been conducted by political scientists who are Latin American experts, is that these laws and these policies that have been put in place, they have not curbed violence and harassment, and there are still long ways to go related to underlying issues of sexism and structural violence. So yeah, I don't mean to suggest that they are, solving all of the problems there.
Okay, thanks. Leah, I want to get back to you because you are, speaking of swimming in the sea, you are in the middle of it right now in Parliament, and this seems like a different Parliament from when I was there. This seems more fractious, more polarized, and there's a thing about parliamentary language. Well, that seems to, I know the speaker does his best, but that seems to have just about gone out the window. What, from your vantage point as a parliamentarian, if you were in government and you were the minister responsible, what kinds of changes would you make? And maybe a second part of that question, what should the people on this call, the activists, be doing to push for these kinds of changes?
Well, I think you're right. I think there's growing extremism in the country, and you see that growing extremism in the House of Commons. The speaker, our current speaker, I would say he's having trouble controlling the House. I think it's, at the point where he's lost control of the House. And so there's a lot of name calling and bullying that's occurring in the House. I know that we're talking a lot about, however, violence and misogyny and all of that in politics. That is very real. And I have to say, I experience a whole lot of it. And I think it's not just because I'm a woman, it's because of also my ancestry being an Indigenous woman. I have the combined impact of sexism, misogyny, and a whole lot of racism that I experience from the public. However, I would never discourage anybody from running. And this is why. because I do think we're at a critical juncture in the world. I think we're in a critical juncture, certainly in Canada, where we see a rise of sexism, a rise of violence, a rise of social conservatism, where bodily autonomy is up for debate, whether it's gender affirming care or access to safe trauma-informed abortion care. We see our healthcare system under attack. We see our social safety net under attack. And if I'm not in that seat, who's going to take up that seat? It could be another pale male who is totally obtuse to the rights of women and gender diverse folks who have a different priority, who might not be concerned about things like Indigenous rights or the genocide that's occurring in Palestine. We see a whole lot of that in the House of Commons. So even though that is very present and that is very real, and I don't want to sugarcoat it because it's quite, I would say, pronounced. I don't read my social media. I don't know half the things that are said about me because I choose not to. I do things like I block comments now, not because of my feelings, but because of the safety of my constituents. One who, by the way, is online today, Jade. So I just want to give a shout out to Jade from Winnipeg Center. I noticed that there was a constituent who joined us today. So thanks for joining us, Jade. So I don't want to sugarcoat it. I also don't want this to scare people off from running. I feel like I've gotten a lot accomplished since being elected. The red dress alert system being one of them, which is currently being piloted in Manitoba, to have genocide residential school, what occurred in residential schools as an act of genocide, the first genocide that's been recognized within Canadian borders. I've gotten money for women's shelters and families fleeing violence. I've gotten money for housing. And I've tried, along with community and activists and advocates, to push a progressive agenda forward in the country. So I say that to segue into the second part in terms of what would I do about it. Is it tough sitting in the House of Commons? Absolutely. I think it takes, especially with kind of what's happening right now, to have a speaker that maintains very clear rules and order in the House, including around the violence that occurs in the House, whether it's name calling or physical threats that I've seen recently in the House. The speaker needs to keep control of the House, especially with the rise of extremism, the rise of conspiracy theories. I think we need more control of the House in that regard. And I think it's more important than just creating laws. I think it's about re-inspiring the electorate to have faith in politics again, and inspiring the electorate to get involved within the political systems. I think we are very unimportant as politicians. I always say I'm the most unimportant because I'm one vote away from losing my job. That's how irrelevant I am. It's the people that have the power. It's the movement and people that have the power. And so even as an elected official, my focus actually isn't on my own power. It's on the power of the people and how that pushes for change in the House of Commons. And I think that's deconstructing colonial structures, colonial hierarchical structures where we place power with the people with title and position when they've never really had the power. The power has always been with the people. The power has always been with the movement. I come from the movement. I was elected by the movement. I'm financially supported by the movement. That is where the power is at. And I'm mindful of that. I'm also mindful of the fact that even though, I've experienced a lot of violence since being elected, I also have a lot of privilege. I have a sergeant of arms office that looks after my safety. I have security around my house. I have privilege that other Indigenous women in my community, including the ones that were found in the landfill, who were taken 2 blocks down from where I live, they don't have sergeants of arms. They don't have people protecting their safety. So when I look at the kind of violence I experience, I also have to measure that with the privileges that I have, privileges that many people that I'm fighting for in the House of Commons don't have, which means that my role is important. My voice is important. And to be one of 338 people in the country fighting to improve the material conditions of all people, that's so much privilege. So I think that's where it's at. I think we need to focus on building movements. We need to focus on building movements like the Christo-fascist extremist movement has been working on building a movement. We need to put that same amount of energy in building a counter movement of human rights, a counter movement of nonviolence, a counter movement of hope through real action, like, modernizing our social safety net so that people aren't living in poverty and ending up in encampments because we've given carte blanche to corporate landlords who are taking up the residential spaces. That's where my focus is. So I know that when I'm asked questions about violence, I'm always really mindful, because the very people who are scared to run because of it are the exact people we need in that place now. We need to elect trans women. We had the first trans man elected ever in Manitoba. We need more people from the disability community. We need more women, but not just women. We need BIPOC women, because not all women are the same. We don't have the same histories, we don't have the same experience, and we don't have the same experiences when we walk on the street, or even in that place of the House of Commons, where even in that place, we deal with misogyny and racism. So, like, kudos to everybody online. I hope some of you are thinking about running. And I don't want to discourage you from running. In fact, please run and take my place. And, fight the good fight and take up that seat, so we don't have another right-wing pale male who doesn't believe in reproductive rights, who's not fighting for human rights, sitting in the seat in the House of Commons.
Leah, I'm going to get to questions in just a minute, but there is one comment that I want to make sure you hear, which says, Leah, you are exactly the kind of person we want and need in that seat. So don't give it up. Someone else says, if this was a time for a standing ovation, this would be it. If there was a time for a standing ovation. Anyway, bravo. Courtney, I'm going to put this to you, though. The issue about the importance of advocacy work, the importance of community engagement. Obviously, you spend a lot of your time encouraging women, those who identify as women, to run for office. There's some great comments coming in. Anyway, let me ask you, what can communities do? What can activists do to help make this change? Because I'll tell you, when I was running for office, and there's a phrase in the labor movement, the weakest force on earth is the feeble strength of one, and together we're strong. And I found that in campaigns, and anybody who's run for a position, run for office, it is that strength of community, that strength of support and engaging your activists. So tell me about what you're finding in in the campaign schools and in your work for running for elected positions?
Absolutely. So one thing I want to circle back on is everything, kudos to you, Leah, everything you said, 100%. If it's not you, then who? And it comes down to, if you want to change the system, you got to engage, whether you're on the inside or you're doing something as an advocate on the outside. And it's not enough just for us to be on the ballot as women and gender diverse folks. We need to infiltrate the entire system. And someone who I really look up to is President Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, the first democratically elected woman of an African country. And something that she did, she wasn't able to make her whole cabinet or her whole team women, but she was strategic in placing them as the head of the banking system, as all of the ADMs, as the executive directors of her branches, and having them everywhere. And we need more women and gender diversity and just more diversity in media. We need you behind the scenes in campaigns. EDAs, the biggest block to a lot of women and diverse folks is the nomination process, because it's different for every party in every province and territory. It's not easy to teach. And it's also something that there's no real regulation in that. I have seen on the campaign trail very deserving, capable candidates go through our campaign schools only for their EDA to find out that they want to run, and they change the date of the nomination so it blocks their application from coming in. Or they're putting women and gender diverse folks in non-stronghold ridings instead of the ridings that they know their party will win. So we need you in the EDA. We need you in the party structure. There's election structures within the parties. You don't have to be the candidate, but we need you everywhere, and we need you looking around the table to see who is not there from an intersectional perspective. So that would be what I would say on that. I would also say, just a quick comment back to something that Tracey said earlier around the 2 NDP MPs that were harassed by 2 Liberal MPs. It's not even just that the HR systems don't line up from party to party. It's within the actual government system itself. When we were doing research with provincial and territorial governments, we often found that because there were 3 kind of streams of employment: the elected official, the people elected by the party or the official, and then your nonpartisan employees. If there were things happening like staffer versus nonpartisan employee, elected official versus staffer, like any of those 3 dynamics, the HR systems don't really line up. So even if you do get the resources and the trainings to put through a harassment claim, it often doesn't end up going anywhere, because there's no, I wouldn't say cross-sectoral collaboration, cross-employment sphere collaboration in creating policies to help people.
Interesting that in all of these interconnections, no matter what sector you are in, and the opportunities for us to make a difference, to get engaged and to be able to do that. I'm conscious of the time and that Leah has to leave, and I want to put a question to you that was put out earlier from, where are we here? So a couple of things. Cynthia Wagner says, Parliament of Canada doesn't belong to Ontario, i.e. a province. Parliament Hill does not have laws that provinces regulate. Obviously, there's federal jurisdiction laws. People who work there are not classified as federal employees either. So that is why there are no rules with a gender lens for House of Commons employees. It is an unregulated workplace. Leah, is that your experience? I mean, the House makes its own rules. Am I correct on that?
Well, the House does make its own rules that are passed through committee. I don't think that's what I don't think the problem is that we lack rules. I think the problem is a normalization of misogyny and violence in the House of Commons, and a failure to enforce rules that are there.
Mm-hmm.
You don't lack rules.
Certainly people who work there, and some of them are covered by collective agreements, which are
the employees of the House.
Yes. Now,
so
but
that's a hard question to answer, because people are employed by the House, at the House, by different entities, like for
Mhm.
example, the security guards are over the overseeing of security guards falls under one area. Members of the House of Commons or staffers are governed differently depending on the political party you're even in. The NDP, in fact, is the only political party where their members are unionized. So it's a very complex question, in fact, and it varies by party to party. And then the ones that actually work in the House, they're federal government employees, so they fall under a different union.
It's
So
multi-jurisdictional. I was
it's
there when the guy came in and
multi-jurisdictional
got up
union.
Parliament Hill, and they had to create a unified security force because it was so
Yeah.
splintered.
That's right. So I mean, and again, like even with staffers, it varies from party to party.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's just maybe, I don't know if we'll get more questions for you, but there's one other question just pointing, or a comment from Jane Cox pointing out, she was at a discussion at the University of Sudbury last night, honorary doctorate to General Jenny Kerrigan, the first female chief of defense staff, that was certainly a challenging position in terms of the sexism that she would have faced. And her job is also highly political. And at the convocation was a newly hired female chief of police in Sudbury, again, likely a very political job. So support for women in politics isn't just in legislatures. I think several of you have addressed that issue. I don't know if anyone else wants to comment.
Yeah, and absolutely, Peggy. Like it's systemic. And I mean, we know in the military, certainly, the reports of gender-based violence, sexual harassment, assault. We've heard about many cases in relating to the RCMP. It's systemic, and I think if you look at systems, even if you look at the RCMP again, that's another example of an institution that was put in place to remove Indigenous people off their lands and ship them off to residential schools. That's why we have an RCMP. So if you look at historical foundations of these institutions, they're rooted in violence and misogyny and toxic masculinity and colonialism. So women that break the glass ceiling and get in these systems, it often comes at great cost, but of great benefit for those that follow, especially the women that are coming out right now in the military, that as a result are creating a safe environment for other women who choose to go in the military. I mean, these are trailblazers. These are, we talk about Canadian heroes. These are some of our heroes in the country that are speaking truth to power and paving a path for future generations.
Yeah, good point. You pay a price as a trailblazer, but you open doors for others. Yeah.
Peggy, can I just jump in for a second on?
Sure. Who's? Oh, Tracey. Yes, go
Yeah.
ahead.
I mean, so what's interesting to me is that, in sort of the discussions about the House of Commons in particular, and could also apply to provincial legislatures, is this, the reality is that it is a complex workplace in terms of employment, right? So if we think about just the relationship between staffers and members of parliament, it's 339 individual employers, right? It's the House itself, and then it is the MPs who are directly employing their own staff. And I've heard sort of this before, right? That it's very complex, and therefore it makes it very difficult for violence and harassment to be regulated. But I think you know, we need to just call that out really for what it is, which is, you know, an excuse to not take further action to deal with these issues specifically. And we know that that's the case because there are other Westminster parliaments that share very similar sets of foundations that are doing things to address this issue, that the Canadian House and even the Canadian Senate has not. And I'm thinking specifically about Australia, which in the last 2 years has developed a comprehensive set of behavioral standards and codes that address a lot of the issues that we're talking about here tonight. They're creating an independent parliamentary standards commission and a separate parliamentary workplace support service that can help everybody who works in Parliament. And partly why those initiatives came about is because the Australian Parliament launched an external, fully independent inquiry called the Jenkins Review, which Canada never did. So even when Canada developed its MP Code of Conduct and its staffing policy in 2014 and 15, those have been updated since, there was no sunlight in terms of the extensiveness of the problem itself. Staffers were not consulted in a formal sort of way with how to address this issue. And what's also, I think, interesting about the Australian case is that they consulted widely with women's movement actors, with feminist academics in the drafting and the developing of their rules in order to combat and to recognize that these issues are systemic and do exist across different institutions and also exist in parliaments, which are unique workplaces. And so the creation of these entities, this HR organization, is designed specifically to protect and to shield staffers from political party interference, which does happen in the Canadian House of Commons. So I just wanted to point that out, that yes, it's difficult, but it's not impossible. And we can look to other Westminster systems to see that they are doing some things to address these issues.
Great point. The international comparisons, as you make in your book, are so important. And I think it's a mistake. We somehow think, well, we're so superior to the US and we're so advanced. But really, if you look at the interparliamentary list of the representation in Canada, representation of women in our elected parliament, we are way, way down the list. I think we're more than 60th on the list. So long way to go. And I see Rachel in the chat is talking about the Kim Campbell syndrome, that women being put forward for leadership, but it's kind of a cliff, both a ceiling and a cliff sometimes. Parties like diverse, quote unquote, representation of candidates when it isn't a risk that they will actually achieve power. Patriarchy remains strong. Women have to demand real opportunities if we're going to run. Courtney, what's your take on that?
Absolutely. I mean, I often find, sorry, I'm just reading that down throughout myself here. We do need to demand real opportunities. I do often see situations where women are put into, and especially youth, are put into these advisory groups that are made to see, that come through politics to make it seem like they're making a difference. They're there to provide advice or experiences based on the things that they do. Even advisory councils that are provincial appointments, you often find that you're just kind of talking in a bubble of people that agree, but it's not getting out of there to make real change. So yeah, I mean, when we do the campaign schools, we often talk about the entire process. It's not just getting into the positions, but how we look at the committee formations. I think back to when we had the study on women's health and there was only one woman on the committee. We decided to actually mobilize with some of our campaign school people to advocate for more representation. And one of the names that we recommended for was Jenica Atwin due to her technological expertise, and she did get on there. Another thing too is oftentimes when they get into positions, sometimes the harassment that they feel, they often don't speak up as much as they can because they are being held back by folks who are harassing them in the legislature. And I guess this is kind of putting a question back to you folks, but in terms of heckling and anti-heckling legislation, across the country, we've only ever really seen PEI bring it forward. And there's no public record that it ever went anywhere. One PEI MLA said it did go through, one said it didn't. So it remains a mystery in my mind. But in trying to bring them in to speak out more, to get more of their thoughts and their ideas out there so that they can be contenders, to be on more committees, to get ministerial positions, to do the work that they want to do. Is there a way that anti-heckling can be brought in to the legislatures, provincially, territorially, federally? Because I think of when a hybrid government was being put in permanent after the COVID lockdowns, a lot of the contention around that was the actual definition. So similarly, anti-heckling is often viewed as a lack of freedom of speech. So if it was more defined, is there a way that we could have anti-heckling legislation move forward so that we can continue to say the things that we need in the House and have the opportunities to have that confidence to speak up without having the screaming, the name calling come back at us? Oh, I think Leah's
Leah,
going.
are you heading out? Or you want to
Yes.
speak? Because I
Yes,
have
I
one
do.
other.
I have to head out.
Okay, I have
Yeah.
just one last comment I wanted to give to you.
Sure.
Linda, who talks about her MP, Ontario MP, she's BIPOC, and she seems invisible. The security team doesn't recognize her. I've seen that with other MPs and MPPs for sure.
Yeah.
Are you in the right place? I've seen Black women get asked that. Also the dress code. If you have any last thoughts on that before you run.
Well, just the dress code overall is a binary. I think they need to change the dress code to modern to be with the times of gender fluidity. So I mean, even the dress code is pretty sexist and misogynistic and binary. So I mean, like, it's a problem, period. In terms of like being recognized in the House, I haven't had that problem, but I know that there's a lot of MPs, particularly women, that have had that issue. And I think it's important to note that security guards, part of like the security staff, part of their responsibility is to know the faces of MPs coming in. I don't necessarily, I mean, maybe I haven't concerned myself with it, but I don't necessarily feel as though I've been invisible. Like, I find that once in a while I'll have to say I'm an MP. I kind of see it, and maybe I'm too flippant about it, but I'd rather them ask me who I was if they don't know than let people in that aren't safe that could jeopardize my safety. So I kind of see it the other way, like, oh, don't worry. Thanks for doing your job. But in terms of the dress code, I think we need to change the dress code. Like if we're going to be more inclusive, that also includes dress codes.
Mhm.
So
Leah, let me take this opportunity. There are so many comments online, lots of shout outs, woo-woos, call for standing ovation.
Thank you.
So yeah, I hope whenever the next election is, I hope you're running again. Clearly your constituents love you and you've been amazing here this evening.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. And if you're thinking about running, please run. I feel like there's a good crowd here of good human beings. So think about it. We need good human beings. Okay. Take care, everybody. Have a good night.
Thanks.
Bye.
Good night.
One thing I just wanted to quickly add that I wrote in the chat to Rachel as well is like it was specific example goes back to that nominations process, and often women being put into the non-stronghold ridings. I see it all the time. We need to demand to be put in the spaces that we know we can win and where we want to represent, not where the party wants to put us. That's a big thing.
Yes. That's a very important question to ask if you're being asked to run or if you want to run, which constituency, and do your homework to find out what the history of that is, because yeah, I have seen some incredible candidates. I don't want to say wasted, but they ran to win and there was no way they were going to win.
Yeah.
But I also don't want to let your comment go, Courtney, where you talked about heckling.
Yes.
And you
Yeah,
know,
it's not
heckling
defined
is
by
kind of like part of a like football sport, you know, where you're cheering for your team on the sidelines, but boy, it can really shut people down. Like not everybody, even in politics, not everybody is loud and boisterous. You know, quiet people can be very effective and wonderful leaders. So, yeah.
Peggy,
Do you have further comments on that, or Tracey, do you want to get in on that?
Yeah, I just was thinking about it because I've seen that the legislation in the PEI legislature as well. And to me, this is a question about framing. When you say that it's an anti-heckling legislation, that, I think, we want to be careful because we want an effective opposition. We want an opposition that holds the government to account. And I think heckling is a part of that, is a legitimate part of that. But really, what I think in the context of this conversation matters is that the actions and behaviors of representatives during parliamentary proceedings should not resort to sexism, racism, homophobia, transphobia, ableism, etc. And so to me, then, what it's really about, it's not about anti-heckling. It's about holding yourself to a standard that you are, demonstrating to the rest of society and to your constituents and to the people who elected you to a higher standard, and that you're not engaging in sexism and racism in your in what you're doing. And so that's what I would say is it should be a respect and civility legislation that still allows space for effective accountability to occur, right, for the opposition political parties. And I want to come back to as well that I think the role of the speaker is really essential here. So we see speakers that are I guess in terms of like individual parliamentary privileges, right? And one of those parliamentary privileges for a member is that they are able to exercise and fulfill their duties and responsibilities free from intimidation and harassment. And if you are a member standing up and representing your constituents and you're being, having sexist and racist, comments thrown at you, that's a violation of your individual parliamentary privilege. And that needs to be called out by the speaker, just as much as the protection of individual freedom of speech for MPs. And I don't think that it is to the same extent today.
Because that's a huge thing that does repulse people from wanting to be in that. I remember I brought in 40 women and gender diverse youth to represent their MHA for the day. And we went to a sitting locally and they were all but throwing fists that day. And the participants were so upset. They're like, we don't want to be there. I'm like, this is why we need you here, because we need to change spaces. We need you down there saying, you don't talk to our colleagues. You don't talk to me like this. And I think redefining or reminding people what heckling is supposed to be, because heckling, I actually agree with what it's supposed to be. It's actually very empowering for backbenchers, and a lot of lack of civic education in our school systems often make our opposition groups look like bullies when really they're just asking the questions that they're supposed to ask. So it comes to a point that we need to better define this or give our speakers of the House more training on when to find that line and stop it. It became a lot easier with hybrid proceedings because you could just mute people or your face would come up and they would know who was saying it. But, it's a little bit more difficult when you're on the ground, on the floor.
Yeah, I think, Parliament can be exciting. I don't know if I'm the only nerd here who actually watches CPAC, but it can be really exciting, and parliamentarians want to applaud their leader, or someone asks a good question and they want to heckle when they think it's not a good question, but it can be used to shout down others, and a good speaker will make sure that that gets called out and that people get to say their piece. Others are talking about how appalled they are about the heckling. So we're getting lots of comments here. I'd like to come back to a point Elizabeth made and put this to you. She says, thanks for a great discussion. Curious to hear more about collective organizing and advocacy. Can you tell us more about efforts to collectively organize to combat violence against women in politics? Let me see if I can get the rest of this. Has there been much collective organizing? Has it been prioritized? Why hasn't this advocacy led to the changes like those in Latin America? I guess, Tracey, this is over to you.
Yeah, that's a really great question. And one of the, when I was hearing Peggy ask this question, one of the things I was thinking about is an organization in Ontario called the Women of Ontario Say No. And I, just to kind of give people who are not from Ontario a little bit of a background, in Ontario, like many other provinces, right? We know that in Canada, municipalities fall under the jurisdiction of provinces. And there has been widespread reports in the media of mostly male city councillors who have engaged in harassment and sexual assault and violence against mostly women. It's counselors, staffers, members of the public. And due to the Municipal Act in Ontario, there's very limited options of how councils can deal with this. And so there was a particular situation with a councillor in Ottawa where there were multiple Integrity Commissioner reports that substantiated claims that he had engaged in egregious acts of harassment and violence. And the most that the council could do was to request that he resign from his seat and to withdraw his pay up to 90 days. And that's it. And in response to this, a number of women across the province organized, and it includes some survivors of gender-based violence, and they went to different city councillors to speak to them about the importance of putting pressure on the provincial government to change the municipal laws to regulate sexual violence in city halls. And for various reasons, it has not yet been successful for political reasons, but we remain hopeful that the Ford government will take action on this. What they'll end up doing is another question entirely, but I think it's a really good example of the types of activism that is occurring in Canada and the pressure that this group has put on decision makers across the province very successfully, I think. And I'm sure Courtney has other ideas as well from Equal Voice.
Yeah, Courtney, over to you.
Thank you. Thanks. Yeah, and that's a fantastic group that you mentioned, Tracey. We've been doing quite a bit of mobilizing. We've been a little quiet in our mobilizing the last few years, but we're going to be a bit more bold now this year. But our campaign schools, we've had around almost 400 women and gender diverse folks go through it since January of this year. So one thing that we do in that is that we've been creating a bit of an alumni engagement program that's going to hard launch in 2025 to keep those networks growing across cohorts. Within our campaign schools, it's not just bringing women and gender diverse folks together. For example, right now I'm hosting an online cohort with around 60 women and gender diverse folks across Canada. And one of the topics that is weaved through all of our sessions, but one that we specifically focus on towards the end is systemic and overt barriers. And we do address gender-based violence that you could potentially face on the campaign trail and in office. I do have a simulation exercise of the different kinds of people you'll meet on the campaign trail. And we actually simulate those situations, role play them out. And one of them is around sexual harassment. And just recently, I received an email from a participant in Nova Scotia who said, I'm on the campaign trail. I just got flashed by a man, and I'm so excited to let you know that I knew just what to do thanks to you. And she was thrilled to let me know this. I was thrilled to hear she knew what to do, not that she got flashed. But we go through these scenarios in a very unthreatening way, in a network that people feel trusted and safe with. And we give them the skills on how to de-escalate, how to remove yourself, and how to be an effective bystander, more importantly, in these situations, because we can't leave the responsibility to the person who's facing harassment. So we do teach you how to handle them if they do. We hope it won't. Usually you don't. Most people are apathetic at worst on the doors, but we are seeing people come back now and say, thank goodness that was an exercise that we did. It's not just how do you budget, how do you do comms, how do you make a team, but it's how do you retain yourself in politics, the entire team, because if you didn't know to expect someone to flash you at the door or to do something else, you might become traumatized and just jump right off the trail. You may never want to be part of politics again after that. But because she knew how to handle it, she was able to protect her mental health and remove herself from the situation. So we've been mobilizing in that way to really empower those coming out onto the campaign trails to take care of one another.
That's really a great initiative. And I certainly learned when I was campaigning to go out with at least one other person. And especially in apartment buildings, sometimes it's easy to get isolated on a floor. Somebody gets ahead or you get ahead. That's when you can run into problems. So there's lots of practical tips to keep yourself safe. And in terms of advocacy, I just want to give a shout out to Nova Scotia, because the Nova Scotia government has passed a bill introduced by Claudia Chender to deem intimate partner violence as an epidemic. And this was introduced at the initiative of a woman who works in the shipyards, from Unifor, who has done a lot of work in her union. Her union's done a lot of work on the issue of gender-based violence. And of course, with the murders in Nova Scotia, she wanted to draw attention to this. She worked with the leader of the NDP to introduce this bill. And she went with a crew, this woman from her workplace, and her name is gone out of my head, I'm sorry, but she worked with a crew from her workplace, and they went to the legislature, and they couldn't get a meeting with the premier, and one of his assistants was kind of sloughing them off, and they were really upset, and they were about to leave, and the media was all around, and she just let him have it verbally in front of all the media. This woman who's shy out of the shipbuilding plant, and I think she found out he hadn't even read the bill, but he said he wasn't going to do anything about it. And I think she said, what if it was your daughters? And men often will hide behind daughters. I'm not sexist, I have a daughter. But I think something in her comments hit home to him, and he literally raced after them outside of the legislature to tell them he was going to, give him a few minutes. He was going to review this, and then he came back and said they would pass the bill that day, like all readings, and proclaim it that day, which I have never heard of. And so it just shows you get your posse and you go and lobby and advocate, and you just never know what you're going to come up with. So kudos to Nova Scotia.
Kudos for sure. And somebody asked, how did she handle it when I explained the situation? So we give a lot of different examples, on how to give different rebuttals and overcome certain types of obstacles. In the sexual harassment one, it's often, first off, making sure people know it's possible because of fight, flight, freeze. It's more so making sure that they don't end up in a situation where they don't expect it and do something based on adrenaline that could make the person escalate further. In our situation, we talk about you immediately stop it, not worth the vote. You back away. And again, she had taken some precautionary steps in that she did have someone with her. It was daytime. There were different things that she was proactive about, but you back away just in case they do come forward at you. And once you've got a couple of feet, that's when you kind of book it, and you just make sure that you record what house it is, make sure your team doesn't go back. And then also, for being a good human, you reach out to your opposition in other parties to let them know so that their teams are protected, because it is a multi-partisan issue. So that is the protocol for that one. So I decided to answer that real quick.
Peggy, could I jump in for 1 second? Because I think there's also things that elected officials can do as well, and academics, right? So it's, the activist role is really, really important. And some academics are activists, as are some politicians, but in their roles as elected officials, there have been some interesting, I think, developments in ways in which women in particular have been advocating around this. And I want to just, give a shout out to two of these actions. So the first is the Halton Elected Representatives Organization, HER. I guess it's not really an organization, but a group of women from Halton Region in Ontario who came together to support one another and to pledge, and it's at all levels of government, municipal, provincial, and federal, that they will work together to help each other and to call out sexism, homophobia, racism when they see it, to support each other. That's cross-jurisdictional. And then the other is on Parliament Hill, the Canadian Association of Feminist Parliamentarians launched a new sort of campaign to draw attention to harassment, incivility, and workplace toxicity on Parliament Hill. And they developed a pledge that they asked other MPs to sign. And it's, to draw attention to the issue and to show a sign of solidarity in support in public. And I think as well, academics have a role to play. On the research side, obviously, there's a lot of research that needs to be done. In the book that Cheryl and I wrote, it's the first book on gender-based violence in Canadian politics, but it's really intended as a conversation starter. There were many avenues that we were not able to pursue in the book that we hope that other academics will take up. So that's the research side. But on the teaching side, listening to MP Gazan, listening to the stories of the women and the work of Equal Voice, and the women who are women activists who are really doing important grassroots on the ground work. These are the stories and the political activities that we need to highlight for our students in our classrooms, to say that, yes, it's tough, and yes, you might read about and see violence and harassment occurring for political actors who are stepping forward and putting their name into the hat to run for public office. But look at all of the amazing things that they're doing when they're there, right? To really emphasize the point that it matters, that power should be more equitably dispersed and held, and that when they are there, they are making an impact. So that's, I think, the role that we can play as professors, as both researchers and teachers.
So lots
Sorry.
on the agenda. Sorry, go on. I just want to give a shout out because I couldn't remember the names of the women involved in that cornering of the premier, Corin Beeman and Jennifer Murray, and I had forgotten, and that's not good. There are so many amazing comments in the chat. So please, Courtney, jump in.
Oh, I was going to say another great example of mobilization done well is the No Space for Hate campaign by Sarah Worthman, a phenomenal queer historian. And it's basically a nonviolent space to talk about active learning of bias, bullying, inclusion, and allyship, especially to the 2S LGBTQIA plus community. They have done some great work that has shifted conversation politically across all provinces and territories. So I just wanted to give them a quick shout out as well.
That's
Peggy,
great.
could I just
Tracey,
get,
jump
so
in.
I just saw a comment about Can't Buy My Silence, which is incredible and absolutely needs to be mentioned and included in this conversation. Doing amazing work on the use of non-disclosure agreements, which has not yet, we do not have legislation on that yet at the federal level, and is something that is used by political institutions, right, in the Senate and in the House. So it needs to apply to workplaces across the country, but it also needs to apply to political institutions specifically as well. And if other people who are listening are involved in other organizations and that are engaged in this work, please share them with us in the chat.
So we've got one here from Rachel saying that in Toronto, gender-based violence was declared an epidemic, but it really didn't amount to much. It sounds like it was pro forma. And I guess that is another question. How do you, even if you get something like this passed or laws passed, as in all law or rules, it depends on enforcement. Maybe if you have thoughts on that, you could perhaps jump in.
Well, I'll take a kick at it. So if you mean the rules related to like dealing with violence and harassment in political institutions, this is exactly what we're seeing, right, in the Canadian case. So we have since 2015 an MP to MP code of conduct on sexual harassment, which when Cheryl and I have gone to talk to colleagues in other countries about this, that we get asked a lot of questions about that MP code of conduct, and it is occasionally held up to be a potential best practice for other countries to look at. And we have, I think Cheryl and I's own research has explored this issue, is that it's not just what's written on paper, right? That MP code is actually amended to the standing orders of the House. It's how it works in practice that really matters, Peggy, to your point exactly. Mm-hmm. And so just to give one example, one of the ways in which that MP code of conduct on sexual harassment works in practice is that it gives political parties a lot of say. So the party whips are named specifically in the code of conduct, and they are directly involved in potential mediation between the parties. It's an independent investigation that will occur if it goes beyond that. But whips are also then involved if the findings are substantiated and there's a determination that a sanction needs to be applied against an MP, it's the whips who are involved. So whips who, may or may not have formal training related to gender-based violence, whose sole jobs in the House of Commons is to protect the party's reputation from damage. And so you have this party person who's deeply involved, right? And so this is a really good example of looking at how those rules will actually work in a concrete kind of way. And what Cheryl and I have argued in some of our research is that this serves as a deterrent for folks to come forward, especially if you are a staffer of a particular, political party. You don't want to be the person that is responsible necessarily for having, the party's sort of dirty laundry aired in the media. And so this is a real deterrent, even though there's a formal code of conduct on the books.
I mean, political parties are, the goal of a political party is to win power. So this, I think, is I think what you're calling out, Tracey, is that if their goal is to win political power, at what price? and bending what principles. And so that always becomes not just how is it seen, I think, is what many party officials will be weighing.
Sorry, Peggy, one last thing just to push off of that. If you're interested, if anyone's interested in the staffer side of things in particular, there's a really great chapter in Cheryl and I's book by Megan Cloutier that looks at, she did original survey data to look at the experiences of staffers, and her argument in the chapter is that even though there's a separate staff policy, but even though these policies are formally in place, political staffers are still experiencing violence and harassment on Parliament Hill.
Yeah, I totally think that is what gets experienced, because everything gets subsumed into the party. But there are MPPs, MPs, MLAs that have been kicked out of their party for harassment. They probably should lose their seat, but what the party can do is kick them out. And that has certainly happened. Now, there are some amazing comments. Someone was asking, okay, in my experience, many people will overlook misconduct if there's money or power involved. Politics, both are often included. There are great comments, and someone asked, will these be recorded with the recording? Yes, they will. So if you have more comments, throw them in. So in the last 15 minutes, so maybe the last 10 minutes before we do a wrap up, I'd like each of you to reflect on what your background and your knowledge and skill in this area can do to help our next panel, which is specifically about Nova Scotia. Are there things that people in Nova Scotia can look to in terms of making change, lessons that can be held over for the next panel? Yeah, who'd like to? Someone's saying here, do you have time for me to write a novel? Okay. Yeah, great comment. Yeah, what can we take to move to the next panel, which is very specifically looking at the Nova Scotia context?
I guess I'll just jump off and start, because I spent a lot of time in Nova Scotia this last year getting prepped for the elections there. And I know I did a campaign school with around 60 individuals. A lot of them are looking at the cycle after this one, and they're just getting that knowledge now. So the moment you think that you might be interested in this, get the knowledge you can, because a lot of what you can strategize on the trail can be done in advance to allow you to focus on properly handling the more systemic issues on the trail that you might not be able to strategize so much. But all I will say is that, Nova Scotia is not, they're not protected from all of the things I mentioned around EDAs, party structures. If you think that you are gonna run provincially or federally, get in your EDA now, learn who they are, learn who's part of that, but also learn the actual nomination rules and get out on the trail with somebody else as soon as possible, because you can do a lot of your own ideas on the trail and figure it out through somebody else's to see what will work for you. But it's also making sure that you know the process, so that you know that if somebody is trying to convince you to go to 2 ridings over instead of the one that you want, that there might be another reason as to why they're suggesting that, or to know the right people, so that if they find out you're doing an application to be in nominations, that they're not going to pull the rug out from underneath you before you can get that in. So get into your party system right away if you think that's something you want to do. And we recently did a cross-country survey on the insights of what motivates and demotivates women and gender diverse Canadians from running. The top 3 reasons are lack of training and resources on how to run, political financing, and harassment. So our campaign schools do go into all 3 of those. And you also build a network. We had 3 people run and win in Nova Scotia in the municipal elections, 2 in Halifax, 1 in Clare. We have 1 person running provincially right now. There is a lot of talent in Nova Scotia, and I hope that you Nova Scotians on the call are going to mobilize behind them, because they can't do this alone, not because they don't have the capabilities, but because the system doesn't allow you to. So get on the trail with them, get on their teams, do what you can, because we need you out there. It's not enough to just vote anymore.
Thank you. And also in my book about women running for office, it's like a 101 of how to run for election, from how to make the decision, what research you need to do, how to find out about a which political party, which riding, when is the timing, all the questions you should ask yourself. And with a whole whack of advice from women who have run, some who won, some who lost, and they have tips for anyone thinking of jumping in. So there's another resource.
We'll have to get you on one of our campaign schools, because we also have around 20 or so different guest speakers from different parties, different levels, different geographies, to get different insights. So we'll have to get you in the next cohort.
That'd be great. I'm one of the founding members of Equal Voice nationally, and they sure help me in terms of making my decision and informing myself before I first ran for elected office. So yay, kudos to Equal Voice.
I also wanted to quickly add, as a last thing, is a lot of people struggle to get involved in partisan politics because they don't feel like any one party represents them. And I just want to say that that's good. You should not fully agree with any one party. If you are struggling with that very starting point of, I don't know where to even go, all I can say is, look at parties like public transportation. No party will ever get you to where you want to go, just like a bus, but you pick the route that gets you closest. So just know that you don't want politicians to just tout the party line anyway. So if you're struggling, that is the first place to start.
I would also just say that while no party is 100% a good fit, pick the one that best aligns with your principles, because if you go strictly with the party that's most winnable, even if you don't align with their values, I always say it'll be like a shoe that never fits properly. It'll hurt every time, and probably not a good recipe.
I like that metaphor.
Tracey, well, maybe I'll just ask you both, because we're getting towards the conclusion. There's terrific comments, but maybe I can ask each of you for any final thoughts. I know you both want to encourage more women and gender diverse and other diversity in elected office. You also want us to use any power that we have, community power, electoral power, to transform the institutions that we've had for hundreds of years. So advice for someone who's obviously, those that are on this call are interested, maybe some are thinking of running for office or have run. So what final thoughts do you have about our topic tonight?
Well, at the risk of sounding a bit corny, I would say that one of the takeaways is that you are not alone, and that politics can be a very isolating, alienating, toxic experience, but it can also be extremely rewarding and an opportunity to create the change that we really need in society. And I was thinking, specifically about your question for the next panel, is look at all of the amazing organizations that have supported these 3 panels that are Nova Scotia based, right? Be the Peace Institute. These are organizations that are committed deeply to addressing many of the issues that we've been talking about tonight. And I'm extremely thankful that they were willing to put the time and the energy and the work into facilitating this important discussion, and to be able to connect with them has been absolutely amazing. And I know we'll talk about this at the end, but one of the things that we wanted to do was to provide people with some resources. And so this will be something that hopefully if people are looking for support and academic research, or research from different organizations, community organizations, we'll be able to provide some of those documents for you.
Excellent. Yeah, there'll be some great resources that kudos to you, Tracey, for putting that together. I think mostly probably there were other hands involved. Courtney.
I guess I gave some advice earlier, but just some general advice to leave folks with is, even if you're not looking to run yourself and you just want to get more engaged, it usually takes on average 7 times asking a woman to run before they seriously take it into consideration. Whereas you tend to ask a man and they're like, hey, why didn't you ask me earlier? So make a solid effort. Something I'm doing informally in Newfoundland right now is I'm mobilizing all the feminists in my network we're looking at the electoral district in our province, and we're finding names for every single one of them, and we're creating a well-rounded ask strategy. So to make sure that people are thinking about this over time, we are looking through LinkedIn profiles to connect what are they doing with what levels and what they can do, and looking for politicians who were, prior ECEs, prior mental health professionals, looking at the connections of all careers to politics. Everybody that has ever gone through a campaign school with me already has what it takes to be a good politician. It's just a matter of getting them elected. And I am sure the exact same is for everybody here on this call. So don't underestimate your lived experience and everything you've done up to this point, because I can guarantee you do better than half the people who are in the House of Commons or in the House, the legislatures provincially right now.
Great advice. You are not alone. Lots of resources. Trust your own judgment. Get involved. Go to a campaign school. There are other comments online, and I wish we had time for all of them. There's some interesting comment about rural versus urban situations. What I can say is we have 2 more panels coming up. So that's the great news. So I would ask you to join in our next panel, and just to give thanks and point us in the next direction for our next 2 panels, I'd like to call on a municipal councillor who's with us, Casey DeLong. Casey, over to you to wrap up this evening. Just let me throw my thanks out to the organizers, the panelists. Yeah, it's been so interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, please join me in thanking our speakers tonight. With us was Tracey Raney of the Toronto Metropolitan University, Courtney Clarke of Equal Voice Canada, and Leah Gazan, a sitting MP from Winnipeg. And thank you as well to our presenter, Peggy Nash. So yeah, feel free to throw in a reaction on the screen or into the comments to applaud our panelists. And I want to say thank you to all the organizers who put in effort to make tonight happen. As Peggy mentioned, my name is Casey. I'm part of this group that has brought together this series of panel discussions on violence and harassment in politics. I was recently elected to my 2nd term on municipal council in the District of Lunenburg in Nova Scotia. And I'm extremely proud that I was able to facilitate our municipality in declaring gender-based violence to be an epidemic. This was with the support of Be the Peace and Sue Bookchin and Stacey Gotso. So thank you, thank you. We are the only municipality in Nova Scotia, to my knowledge, to date that has done this. And I'm honored that I'm going to be on the next panel, which brings us the Nova Scotia context. So for our panelists next time, we have Micah Dory of TRANS, Trans Nova Scotia. We have Pam Lovelace, former deputy mayor and HRM councillor. Heidi Marshall, human trafficking consultant for the Nova Scotia Native Women's Association and co-founder of the Jane Paul Indigenous Research Centre in Sydney, Nova Scotia. And we have Senator Wanda Thomas Bernard, first African Nova Scotian women to serve in the Senate chamber. It's not an honor to be speaking alongside these women. What tonight's panel has brought to the forefront for me was what we all know to be true. The system is working exactly as it is designed to do. It was built by colonial settlers, by white men for white men. Our next panel will be discussing this in the Nova Scotia context, how to engage locally in politics. Panelists will discuss diversity in politics, including current representation, barriers, and opportunities. They will share what their experience has been as a woman, a person who is gendered non-binary, a person who is racially or culturally diverse, the barriers they have faced, the supports that they have received or would have wished to receive. And I just want to close by saying that I am so grateful that I get to be part of this team, this movement, as a woman in politics who's openly LGBTQ2S++, is a truly disorienting time to be doing this work. And I'm so proud to be a role model to my son and to other members in my community by doing this work. If you live in Nova Scotia, don't forget to vote by the 26th in our provincial election. And I hope to see you on the 3rd. Thank you, everybody.